Hey brothers, welcome in. We're just going to give it about 5 minutes or so just to let any stragglers in. So just be patient. We'll start here soon.
Hey Jake, is it possible that anyone else is in the waiting room right now? I just had a brother say that he can't get in.
He can't get in. Everyone should be able to get in. Um, do you know what link he's using? Should we send him a new link maybe? There shouldn't be any waiting room. Once I hit the broadcast button, it should be good to go.
Yeah, I mean I think the one that he's using is the one that we had posted on Facebook.
Interesting. We've got other brothers in here. Might just want to email him. Do you have his email address?
I don't on hand, but I just commented the link again for him.
Did he say that on Facebook or did he say that on?
On Facebook. He said he's trying again.
Sorry, brothers. We'll get started here in just a second. It's like we're waiting on one person. Well, let's get started. and then I'm sure he'll either figure it out or once we turn it over to Dave, we can try and work on it behind the scenes a little bit.
Yep.
But welcome, brothers. Thank you for joining us for what is, I guess, now just about the 6th or 7th installment of the Summit Series. We're super excited to have you all here, and really just get to learn more from Dave, who Joe will introduce here in a second. My name is Jake Luke. If you don't know who I am, I work as the Director of Expansion for Phi Gamma Delta. I'm super excited to be a part of the team that's helping you bring this series and really hopefully learn some concepts that will translate into the real world. So with that, I'll hand it over to Joe to introduce our speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Joe Roth. I work as the Director of Chapter Development here at headquarters. I am very pleased to introduce to you Dave Willmer. He's an alma mater from my chapter at the University of Akron, graduated in 1992, and was a former staff member and now works for Robert Half recruiting firm. So I will let Dave introduce himself a little bit more.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Joe. And thanks, brothers. We appreciate you taking time on I'm not exactly sure. I think probably have a lot of different time zones here, but here on the East Coast, it's a little past dinner time. I appreciate you taking time with us to go through this. We're going to talk about recruiting maybe in a little different manner, more in a broad scope. And I think if I had to pick another name for the presentation, I would say, why recruiting? Why is it important? And I'll answer that question right off the bat. I don't care what facet of life you work in, whether it be nonprofit, business, education, professional sports, college sports, the art and skill of recruiting is not only important, it's essential. I think in any walk of life, and obviously very important in our fraternity, it's our lifeblood in terms of the fraternity membership, but you'll find it's frankly your lifeblood related to any line of work professionally and personally that you get into. The skills and the know-how and the art of it are key. I would look at it from this standpoint as well. You know, obviously, if people were to ask me what the takeaways from my fraternity experience, obviously the friendships are number one. The idea of community service and having greater purpose is obviously there high on the list. Organizational management and leadership management. I still say to this day, some of the best run meetings that I've seen in 28 years of professional business, the best meetings that I attended or were part of were on 261 Spicer Street back in my undergrad days. But in terms of skill-wise, in terms of importance of what I picked up from my experience from the fraternity, the idea of walking up to an individual or engaging with an individual and talking about the value of membership in an organization or part of a group or a business is invaluable. And the skills and technique by which you learn even the little things essential, and they're building blocks in terms of getting into your professional career. So of course I'm biased. I'm in the recruiting profession, and so let's get that out of the way. Maybe we can go to the next slide, Joe, if you don't mind. I'll tell you a little bit about myself because I come from recruiting, so I speak to it in a very personal manner. As Joe mentioned, I graduated from Akron in 1992, Alpha Omicron, with a degree in business. But soon after that, obviously went into being a field secretary. I thought at the time, although I had a business degree, I was going to work in education and higher ed and somewhere, be a dean of students, and actually maybe get into the recruiting field on college campuses or admissions, if you will. I always liked the idea of that, and obviously from my fraternity experience. So spent 2 years as a field secretary. I will say this, the idea of the skills that I picked up, not only as an undergrad, but as a field secretary, played a key role in terms of where I landed today in my professional career. I will say that. And so I think if you're looking at building blocks in terms of career development, again, any walks of life, not just recruiting, but I would say recruiting in that field secretary program helped me out tremendously. We obviously spend a lot of time in the fraternity staff going through recruiting skills and different onboarding techniques. But soon after that, I went on to get my master's degree at Ohio University, about 2 hours away from Columbus, Ohio, just south. and then went back to work for the fraternity in 96 to 98 as a director of programs. Back then it was responsible for the Fiji Academy, the Ecclesia. Staff has changed a little bit, but we obviously still have a lot of field secretaries. We still have programs. We still have all these things that we do. And again, valuable in terms of where I ended up today, which is at Robert Half. So October 1 will be 22 years. It has flown by. I know that sounds like a lot. I know I probably look and maybe sound a little like an old man. I don't feel like it, I promise you that. And I'm in the recruiting field. And Joe, if you can go to the next slide, what Robert Half does is we recruit in the fields of accounting and finance, office administration, IT, legal, creative. We also have a consulting division called Protiviti, formerly Arthur Andersen. Put that all together, we are the largest staffing organization in the world in terms of leaders and staffing as well as consulting, and there is a slight difference. I don't want to bore you with the details. We've got about 300 offices worldwide. We are a global company, Fortune 500, S&P 500. And we've been doing this for quite a while. I've been doing it for over 70 years. So we have a pedigree and brand name in this area. And if you were to ask, what is Robert Half? We recruit. And you may ask yourself, so you seem like a pretty large company. Is it a big industry? It's a gigantic industry. Now, these stats that I'm going to show you are just in the recruiting or staffing field. This is excluding any type of internal recruiting that a JP Morgan Chase may do, any type of HR that that an Amazon may have, or a Microsoft, or any college campus. This is actually the recruiting field. There is a such thing as when you grow up, you could be a recruiter, a professional recruiter, and that's all you do. It's about $120 billion industry in 2020. Keep in mind, this is COVID tailored, meaning it was a lot larger last year. But when you start putting the letter B, capital B in front of it, I don't know if it matters. It's well over 100 billion in a good year and closer to 150 in a bad year. I'm sorry, the other way around, 150 in a good year, about 120 in a bad year. And this is one of the worst years we've had, and yet 120 billion. There's about 20,000 of us in the US, so it is a large field. And the industry is, in terms of companies, we're one of 20,000. We're one of the largest, though, if you keep that in mind. In terms of accounting and finance, we're number one in the area. IT, top 5, legal, number 1. So you go through the different criteria. That's how we get the number 1 ranking. And as you go through the industry, you can get into the medical field. There are people that recruit for just lawyers and doctors. There are people that recruit for just legal professions or attorneys. There's people that recruit for just engineers. So it gets into different specialization. There are some generalists, but by and large, there are a lot of specialization. That's why it's such a large field. A little bit of ranking in terms of how we do overall. Joe, if you can kind of go to the next slide, that'd be great. So what do? Recruiter, we fill jobs. I know that sounds basic, but pick an industry, we fill open roles. And you may say, well, why would a company need somebody to fill open roles? When you're talking about the specialization and building a network, obviously that takes on a whole different element. You know, and there's two sides of it. One, there's these roles that are really hard to find for organization. They may not necessarily have that in where they're headquartered or where they're looking for it in that particular city. We help them go out and find that. They may want to have it in a different situation. They may not want to hire right away. They may want to do something that's referred to contract to hire, attempt to hire, where it's a try before you buy and you actually hire the person. And then on the same token, there may be, and we're dealing with this today, where it may be not that tough of a position, but just going through all the profiles is a tremendous burden in terms of time and resources. So you may be in a company and you may run an ad and you may get 1,000 recipients that are interested. That sounds great. That's a good problem to have. But to go through and figure out from a professional manner who those best 1,000 are versus spending hours and hours, which each of the 1,000, which is unreasonable to think that you can do that. That's the value that we add to an organization in terms of saving them time and money. And not only that, hiring the right person. Regardless if it's Robert Half or another company, that's what recruiters do. There's a lot of different elements by which you could do that. You can run ads, social networking. Obviously, there's a lot of organizations that are out there that you can pull from. So let's take this a step further. So that's a little bit about the industry, the size and scope. That's a little bit about me, a little bit about the company. Why is this important? And let's say, well, that's all well and good. I'm not interested in getting recruiting. I'm probably interested in getting in accounting. I'm interested in being an attorney. I'm interested in being another walk of life into banking or something like that. These are essential with any role that you play, especially in sales. I think you'll find, again, as I started out, to be able to approach somebody and ask them some open-ended questions and letting them know the value of something, that's sales. So you can tailor it how you'd like. It just so happens in Phi Gamma Delta and recruiting, the thing that you're selling, if you will, or you're promoting is an organization or a chapter in a fraternity. If you're selling a product or service, you would be taking a similar approach in terms of asking open-ended questions, as well as finding prospects of people that may be interested in your product or your service or your organization. That in itself is a skill in terms of the prospecting and honing that in. It's also important in any walk, if you want to be a manager in any organization or in a leadership role, eventually you're going to have to fill a role in nonprofit, in business, in a law firm, and walking through the recruiting processes is going to be very important. It's more than just posting an ad and resumes coming in. We'll talk about that process here in a little bit, but going through that will be key in any type of leadership position, in any managerial role. The art of recruiting and hiring and onboarding is key. And then finally, you know, we talked a little bit about this already, the idea of selling your organization or knowing the benefits by which of joining an organization and be able to articulate that in a fashion that doesn't feel like you're selling or doesn't feel like you're too pushy. That idea of an essence and the art of it is key throughout business, as well as any type of nonprofit, medicine, or any other field related. Let's take the next slide, Joe. So in addition to this, it isn't necessarily just communication skills and open-ended question. There's obviously a lot more to that, as we know in recruiting. There's attention to detail. Listening skills are key. The idea of teamwork, you can't do it alone. Even hiring in our organization, you may have a point of contact, but the best candidates come from actually our other staff members that aren't responsible for the hiring. We refer to that as referrals. I think that sounds very, you know, key in a fraternity environment. You're probably going to have a good recruiting class if all 50 of your members are bringing one or two prospects to the table versus just one recruiting chair trying to go out there and be responsible solely for the membership. So the idea of teamwork and who plays what role and all having a responsibility is very key. And selling your team in terms of why this is important, not only for the organization, but for that person in terms of their career development. If they wanted to get into management, obviously giving them referrals are very important. So you can see the correlation between the chapter and the professional life in terms of recruiting skills and why these things are important. Joe, can we go to the next slide? Building a network. I know a lot of you are on Instagram, you're on Facebook, obviously you're well networked out there. I would strongly encourage you to think about your professional presence out there right now. You know, and my guess is a lot of you are on this session because you have a strong responsibility related to recruiting. You're either part of the committee, you're the recruiting chair, maybe you're on cabinet, maybe you're a Purple Legionnaire. I would encourage everyone on this to have a LinkedIn profile. And you may say, I'm only a sophomore. Why would I do that? That network is very important as far as moving in the next step, again, any professional field that you would have. So great that you're on Facebook. It's great that you're on Instagram. It's great that you're on any other type of social media. If you're not on LinkedIn, I would start that right now. And you can obviously post your position that you're in the fraternity. Just being a member is important too, and any other organization that you're part of on campus. And it's okay to put down some of your high school credentials along with your GPA. Those are the types of things that help with the networking in the professional way. And it's important to do that to make sure that you have branding of yourself. And again, it's similar to recruiting in the chapter. You want to have branding, you want to have marketing, you want to have your name out there. You want to do that silent self-promotion, if you will, from a social media standpoint, and it starts with the LinkedIn profile. So there's some do's and don'ts of there. Obviously, LinkedIn's a lot different than Instagram. It's more of a professional setting. You obviously want a professional picture that you would have. Maybe you take your chapter picture. You want to make sure you're active on that. And we say, well, how do I do that? Obviously, linking in with different folks is important. But I would also say looking at articles, and there's a ton of content on LinkedIn, liking articles, especially in the fields that you're going to getting into, liking and reposting those types of things, make an impression on people, and try to find folks that are in the field that you're interested in, whether that be education, business, or any walks of life. Seek out those individuals, but don't make it just about linking in. Again, make it about the content, the article development, your presence online is key as you move into your professional career. And this is basically looking at this holistically as far as taking this recruiting element, not only the skills, but also to the facets by which you do it and as an in the fraternity, and translating that into a professional approach. So I think we got maybe one more slide that's a Q&A, Joe, if you don't mind. So what we thought we would do is, I think there's a couple questions that both Joe and Jake have. We're going to take about 10, 15 minutes to walk through those. And then we're going to open it up in terms of chat, and probably similar to other presentations that have been done before. So we have a couple questions that Joe and Jake have prepared. But at any time, you can start right now in the chat in terms of asking some questions. It could be about fraternity recruitment. It could be about getting into the field secretary program and the importance of recruiting for that. It could be about related to the professional field, not just recruiting, but any professional field. Anything that you would like in the essence of recruiting, more than happy to answer. So with that, Joe and Jake, I'll hand the mic to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, we appreciate you all once again for being here, and thank you, Dave, for sharing some of the your PowerPoint and your presentation. I think the first question, once again, like Dave said, feel free to use that Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Joe and I will start with some questions, and then we want to hear from you all. So the first question that I have for you, Dave, is really talking about your, I guess, like a good culture fit so when you're doing recruitment or when you're recruiting for different companies and for Robert Half, what makes a good culture fit for your organization? And once again, when we talk about good culture fit, it's not just what you do, but also with like for all the brothers on here, it could be for recruitment in general when you're on the campus. But also going farther with the good culture fit, but are there any red flags that you have when you're searching and you're looking for that fit that may say, this might not be a very good candidate?
Yeah, Jake, I think this is so key. We do a lot of surveys at Robert Half. And again, I mentioned primarily when people think of Robert Half, they think a lot of accounting and finance. Obviously, we have a lot of different other industries that we recruit for. But when you think of accountants, you think of it as pretty straightforward. They have a CPA, they have certain skills. Are they a good accountant or are they not? And if they are, you hire them. If they're not, you don't. It actually is a lot more involved. And I think it's kind of funny in the accounting, which is highly technical, if you will, in terms of skills. The number one thing that our clients are always looking for are good communication skills / cultural fit. They find that they can train people on the technical skills of accounting. If so, they would rather have somebody, Jake, that actually is a better culture fit, is a better interpersonal skills fit than a technical fit. Because the idea is they feel like they can teach that. Versus the other way around, if somebody has strong accounting and finance, but is not a good cultural fit, it does not have those interpersonal skills, it's a lot harder, almost impossible to acclimate that person in versus the other way around. So I would say it's key. And again, a lot of these skills that you pick up in terms of recruiting actually work in reverse when you're interviewing for a role. You're mindful of all these things. So you should be aware of that, not only as the recruiter, but as the recruitee. You mentioned red flags. I'm going to take a Robert Half perspective. And the Robert Halfs, I'm going to name these off, and I'm sure most companies are the same way. In fact, I know they are. But it's actually the devil's in the detail. Red flags are as follows. if you're late. So if I've got a 6 o'clock appointment, I'm on 5 minutes early. If I've got to be somewhere and I have to physically drive and it's a half-hour drive, I leave 45 minutes early, or I would expect somebody to leave to be on time, because really it comes down to what is important to you. And to me, when you're doing a job interview, and again, if you're the recruiter or the recruitee, the importance of how important is this job to you starts from the first thing as far as what time you walk in the door. So being tardy or being late, red flag. Related to that, inconsistent or lack of follow-up. And so I'll just give some really simple examples. When somebody interviews with us and literally an hour later or later that day, they send us a follow-up note thanking us. It's simple, just thanks very much for your time, simple email, pretty standard. That to me sticks out. Frankly, I'm looking for that. Along with that, if we tend to maybe wait a little bit because we may be recruiting a couple more people, the person that is proactive and follows up with another email or phone call if they haven't heard from us in 24 to 48 hours is another form of initiative and importance. But again, take that out. If you don't send a follow-up note and you don't follow up and we feel like we're chasing you, we're led to believe that this is not important to you, or said differently, once you're in the role, this is how you're going to handle our clients. They're not going to hear from you. You're not going to have the follow-up. So I would say tardiness and being on time, red flag. 2, lack of follow-up, inconsistent follow-up, red flag. Those to me are kind of the basics of red flag. I can give you other ones that are kind of self-evident. They seem small, may not seem that big of a deal. And even when they don't happen and someone's late and they walk in, I'm sorry, I'm 5 minutes late. And it's usually a pretty good excuse, but that to me sends a message in terms of importance. When they don't follow up, I got busy, I wasn't sure if you were gonna follow up with me. Again, a reasonable excuse, but again, those are the little things that stick out, but play the opposite way are actually red flags.
Awesome. So Dave, kind of related to that, as you're going through the interviewing process and you know, you get the application, you start interviewing the candidate, how many touch points or what does the process of touch points look like for bringing that candidate through the interview process?
So I'm going to take it from 2 parts. I'm going to take it, Joe, from our clients, and then I'm going to take it from us, because again, we're recruiters, we do this. Very seldom will you see a one and done, meaning there's one interview and they get the job and they don't. If it is a one and done interview with our clients, we would never do that at Robert Half. We would never do that at Robert Half. But if it is a one and done, it's usually because it's a lower level role. It's not a management role or a mid-management role. It's probably a transactional role where there may be high turnover there. And so they're not going to necessarily waste a lot of time because it's kind of a tougher role. And there may be some turnover no matter what they do process-wise. That is the exception. Most of the time, it's usually 3 touch points, Joe, standard. And now it's changed a little bit with COVID, but bear with me. The first one would probably be something like this: a Zoom informational call that's like this, usually one-on-one. It may be with the HR person and not the actual manager, just to kind of go through the skills and background and make sure you verify the resume and everything matches up. But I would call it a preliminary interview. And this is after we've already screened you from our company standpoint. So let's go. Number 1 is the phone screen. May or may not be the manager, HR, preliminary, probably half hour, 45 minutes. Second round typically would be in person. It may be actually a group of people, not necessarily all at the same time, but you may go into one cubicle, next cubicle, and you may be there anywhere from a half hour up to 2 hours where you're meeting with a variety of people. You may be meeting with obviously your direct manager, but also 2 teammates that are on the team. Jake mentioned it earlier, that cultural fit, that's usually the cultural fit where I'm not deciding if you be reporting to me, I'd be your teammate. I'm just determining, I would give feedback to the manager. I don't determine if we hire you or not. I'm not a yay or nay, but my feedback's important to the manager. And if there isn't a good cultural fit, or I don't get a good vibe, and we don't sync up too well or align pretty well communication wise, good chance you don't get hired. So that second round may be multiple people, but at least that manager. And then the third round, usually, typically, would be a final interview. And keep in mind that first round may be 8, 10 candidates for one role. That next round is maybe 5 candidates. And then the final interview is anywhere from 1 to 3 candidates. And it's usually, it gets into things like compensation, start date, strategy, a little bit line of, they obviously really like you, you really like them, it's getting that near the end, and it's basically the final decision. So I would say typically from the clients we deal with, 3 touch points, 3 formal touch points. There may be a lot of informal touch points as far as follow-up email, verification, phone call, paperwork, things of that nature. So if you were to include that, you're getting in a half dozen, 6, 7, 8, but actually formal touch points, I would say 3. If I can spend 30 seconds to say Robert half, we do that as well, but we ensure there is basically at least 3 to 5 of our team members that are talking with the person. And those various touch points, we do at least 3. Again, COVID makes it a little bit more difficult, but we try to do it in different environments. One, in our office and actually in our bullpen where we work, so they can actually see us. So if I had to translate that into fraternity life, it would be to actually coming to a chapter event and like see us in action. We're not even going to talk with you. We're going to put you in a chair. You just see us work, and it's like 90 minutes. And you can kind of get a feeling if that person's uncomfortable or comfortable, no matter how you communicate with them right away. And then we like to take them to lunch outside the environment, and then one probably more of a formal conference room type setting. So similar to what our clients do, but a little bit different settings to see them in a different environment and an array of people involved.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And so with all these touch points too, it kind of leads to my next question, and you might have hit on it a little bit, but with these touch points, how do you go about developing like a recruitment philosophy? And that's kind of, like what works, what doesn't work. Once again, I know you've hit a couple of them maybe with these touch points, but if you could talk more about that philosophy, I think that'd be really great.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about my organization in terms of my management style. My thing to my managers is when we have an open position and we haven't already started, we have failed. We should always be recruiting in Robert half, because we don't want to get to a point, because we mentioned all these touch points and they take time, and you want people to make good decisions related to it. And I want to have choices of dozens of people for one role, not 1 or 2 right off the bat. And so in order to accomplish that, we've always got to be talking to people, networking with people, asking if they're interested. You may say, well, do you always have roles open? No, we don't. And so, Jake, it would be something like, as I'm talking with you, Jake, we think you would be a great person for our organization. We don't have anything necessarily right now, but let's talk about a little bit about what we do. What that does is it takes a little pressure off it. It's like, well, do I have to make a decision right now? No. Let me tell you a little bit about our organization. To do those bullpen visits that we talked about when there's no pressure. Now, you probably already have a job at this point, Jake. So having you taken time out of your day, we got to be creative about it. Maybe it's over the lunch hour, but there's really no pressure when we do it that way. Then when it comes time for an open role, and if I got 20 Jakes, if you will, and I've had 20 of those conversations, now
That'd be amazing.
We'd all win, right?
Yeah. Sorry.
But I think what you would find is 10 of them will say it's just not a right time, or I'm not ready to make that type of move. The other 10 are like, yeah, I am interested. Then you start going through this formal process that Joe and I talked about, that you can get them down the line. So to me, the philosophy number 1 is we should always be recruiting. Our business has been devastated by COVID. We're pleased to say we're rebuilding back, and we knew we would. But there was a lot of factories shut down, a lot of companies, when states were completely shut down, we didn't necessarily have a lot of new incoming business. We still recruited internally. We weren't going to hire anybody, and we still are today. But we know in Q3, we will be back to hiring, and we will need profiles. So we continue to build a good network, even in the worst of times when there's no roles. So philosophy number 1, and maybe philosophy 1 period, is always be recruiting.
Yeah, and I think that's super interesting, Dave. And I want everyone on the call here to realize that, even companies are always recruiting. We talk so much about dynamic recruitment, but just 365 or recruit 365. We're not the only ones that are preaching Recruit 365 in our own way, shape, or form. We're always recruiting. We're always supposed to be, even if there's no job open, or even if there's no bid that we can physically give out to someone, right? We can always be recruiting so that when the time comes in Q3 or in the spring or whenever that new time comes, we're already ready to go. We've already built those relationships. We've already built friends and potential brothers for the future. So when that time comes, we're not hanging in the background. We're already playing offense. We're not playing defense, waiting for other things to happen. So I think that's very important that you just said, Dave, in bringing it back to the fraternity. So,
Hey, Jake, can I add one more part? If I had to think of our top performers, the people that are the movers and shakers in our company, they actually probably took the longest to recruit. If I was to walk up, somebody that's really viable that you just know, man, this person is really good. If I walk to them and say, hey, you want a job at Robert Half, that's a turnoff. That would be a turnoff. It can't be that simple of a process, because that wouldn't be attractive to really good people in the field, our field. So our best people, the movers and shakers in our organization, took, we talked about different touch points, but from a timing perspective, took months to get to the point where we're actually interviewing. That's okay. We kind of like it that way, especially if we're doing it ongoing.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't need to just jump right into Robert Half right away. We don't need to just jump right into fraternity right away, because ultimately, once again, just like Dave said, we're building relationships, we're building friendships, so that when the time comes, we've been taking a few months already to recruit them, and then we're ready to go. So I love that, Dave. Thank you.
And so, Dave, kind of taking this whole process, you've gotten your Jakes, you've had your lunch with your Jakes,
and our Joes, and
we've put him through the formal process now, and we've got our guy, and he's accepted the offer, and he's ready to join Robert Half. He's ready to join Fiji. So, what does the onboarding process look like, and particularly, what does it look like to make that guy or that girl feel like they're a member of the team? Because I imagine you want them to feel like they are part of this team and working towards the same goal. Otherwise, they're not going to be as a productive employee.
It's interesting, Joe. You say that onboarding, we take as the continuation of the recruiting process. Meaning, let's just take that prospect that we had where we spent 90 days to get in the point where we're hiring. Keep in mind our profile. And it's similar to the fraternity, I guess. Our profile aren't necessarily people that have done recruiting before. Usually in accounting and finance, they're former accountants that are now getting in the recruiting. So it isn't like they walk in and say, I got this, I'll see you guys at the end of the day. I already know what I'm doing. It's just the opposite. They have the skills and background to have some good conversation with their clients, but they really know nothing about how to do the job. And so from day one, not even day one, before they start, we walk through a checklist as far as from their offer, it's called a plan the placement, if you will, from their offer to what's going to happen days leading up to they actually walk in. And then from there, it's very detailed as far as what they're going to be doing. Now, they're going to ask questions probably in the recruiting process, what that looks like. So it won't be a surprise. We'll have already talked about what this looks like continuously. But that onboarding process, we invest a lot of time and money into it. We have found, and I guess this is probably similar to the fraternity or any other business, the first 6 months, first 12 months are critical. If you're going to make it in this business and be successful, we're going to know probably in 90 days to 180 days if that's happening. So every day counts. Every day of onboarding counts. Making them sure, I don't want to say making them feel important, because I like to think we're already doing that, but making them feel like they have all the information at their disposal and that they feel comfortable with the process. Now, at the same time, it's sales and recruiting. So we want people to be comfortable with the uncomfortableness, because it is, we're going to be asking open-ended questions from people that we don't know, and hopefully they're comfortable in doing that. But we're giving them all the tools and resources. We're making sure they've got their technology. We're making sure they have their target list. We're making sure they're fully understanding what their responsibility, full understanding as far as the different services, just not their own that they're selling, what's in the office as far as the different divisions, where they sit, and a little bit about them. We don't do all that in day one. As I mentioned, it's methodical as we walk through each one. But in our world, that's onboarding. And if I had to translate to the fraternity, making sure that they know what days the meetings are, they know what the expectations are in terms of up front, they know what the expectations of membership are, financial, grade-wise, walking them through all the support mechanisms by which to help them accomplish that. That is all laid out in a very clear format, and there are no surprises. If you walk in and there's surprises, aside from what your clients do, your clients can surprise you, but there should be no surprises from your company in terms of what the expectations are, what you should be doing every day, what you're going to be focused on, and what is good results and bad results. You know, this is what good looks like, this is what not so good looks like, and this is what bad looks like. And we're very clear about that too.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Looks like we got a question from Doyle. He says, let's say you have a summer internship and you are interested in working there a second summer or after graduation. How does that work, or how do you approach that?
Timing's everything. And I would say this, so let's just say that internship, and this is my opinion, each company has a little bit different culture, so it's good to kind of get a lay of the land. There may be somebody from the organization that has a nuance that's a little different than the advice I'm going to give you. But generally speaking, do a good job before you ask for something. So I'm just taking a guess that maybe this internship is right now and you're 3 or 4 weeks into it. I'm just guessing. I wouldn't ask for that second round of internship next summer too early, or that you want a job too early. Make sure that you set a standard that you're doing a good job at what you're supposed to be doing today. Earn the right to ask the question, if you will. So that's number one. Make sure you're focused on the job at hand and doing a good job. Then find out the information for that. Maybe better to ask that in the second half of the summer for next summer. Maybe good to ask about that in the interview question if this is hypothetical and you don't have an internship yet. But if this is real life, you're in the middle of an internship right now, you know, you may want to inquire once you determine and you have set a tone that I'm doing a good job at what I'm doing, I'm interested in this company, I'm in it for the long haul, versus tell me what's next, tell me what's next. I'll translate this to Robert Half, not an internship. Somebody just starts off with us as a staffing manager, which is an entry-level role, and in the first month, they ask when did they get a promotion, and we haven't even finished the onboarding process. I wouldn't say it's a turnoff, but that's real early to be asking that. We appreciate the enthusiasm, appreciate that. Let's get really good at this, and then when we establish that you're good and you add value, that's the next step. So hopefully that answers that question. Make sure you're doing it well to start with. Maybe ask some questions quietly internally, not from decision makers. How does that work? Because I would hate for you to miss a deadline with this advice. But by and large, do a good job. Then that will lead into a good discussion when someone says, by the way, Jake, you're doing a great job. We appreciate what you're doing. It seems like you're catching on. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I really like it here. In fact, I like it so much, I'd be interested in potentially working here full time. In fact, I like it here so much, if the opportunity presented itself, I'd love to come back next summer. That's when the timing's right, when you're paid that compliment and they say you're doing a good job and you have that feedback.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Dave. And Doyle says, awesome advice. Thank you. Correct assumptions as well. So good on you for the assumptions. So then I actually had another one personally. So I struggled a bit as a recruiter when I was an undergraduate. I'm a bit of an introvert personally, and it's a little bit harder for me to, you know, stand in front of that table in the student union and say, hey, my name's Joe, and I'd like to be your friend. What tips would you give to an introverted person or someone that's not as comfortable in that space to be a better recruiter?
I'll relate this to Robert Half, and then we'll work backwards.
Yeah.
Just because I ask you to come by our office and I show you a little bit about Robert Half and what we do, doesn't mean I'm going to hire you. Doesn't mean you're going to take the job that I offer if I was to offer it later on. So let's get that out of the way. So recruitment isn't just go find pledges. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but that's not what you're doing. You're just out there to find prospects of people that potentially we could talk to about membership. I'm not sure any of us, that would be the what you talked about, standing in front of a table and introducing yourself. I'm not sure any of us are great at that or love doing that. And I would probably err more on the side of when I'm sitting in class, the guy sitting to the left of me, the guy sitting right of me, as the papers are getting passed out, 5 minutes before class, I probably feel more comfortable talking to that guy to the left and right of me. Or when I'm maybe sitting in the dining hall, and again I'm making up scenarios, and I'm hanging out with a couple buddies, guy to the left of me, guy to the right of me. You're just striking up a conversation pretty casual. I think you find yourself on any college campus running across casual conversations or small talk. That to me would be the opportunity to build a little bit of relationship, whether I'm an introvert or not. That to me is my recruiting ground, kind of the informal ways. I'm probably, just being honest on recruiting for Robert Half, I'm better in a social environment than I am on a 10-minute conversation on the phone at a networking event or somebody that I'm talking to. Some of the people we recruit are actually current clients or current candidates. So people that you wouldn't think would necessarily be that. So some of the people, Joe, that are prospects, maybe classmates, maybe in your small group environment, maybe at the dining hall. Yeah, we all have to take our turn in front of that desk at the student hall, I guess, from time to time, but that wouldn't be my recruiting ground if I'm you. I would find the other informal situations by which you do it. Intramurals, dining hall, classroom. And again, you may say, I don't think that guy would ever be a Fiji, or I don't know if don't worry about that. We're not determining that right now. In classroom, no one's going to call timeout and the whole chapter come in and say, let's vote right now. Jimmy in geography is going to be a FIGAM. That's not the way it works. We're just simply going to have him be a part of a group of people. Maybe he comes to an event. Maybe we never see him again, or maybe he's the next chapter president. But if we do that 40, 50, 60 times over, we'll end up with a really, really good group of men, and we'll end up with a really good chapter.
Absolutely.
And then Robert Half will end up with a good recruiter.
Well, thank you for that. I tend to agree with you. I appreciate the answer.
Hey, Dave. I think my next question is, I guess, could you talk more about the types of questions that some of our brothers either might hear in interviews, or some questions really that you think are very important when you're interviewing others? So maybe for our recruitment chairman and even some of our new member educators out there, what kind of questions should they be asking? But also, obviously what can they anticipate on hearing if they're getting into interviews and some job searching here pretty soon?
Rule number one in interviewing or in sales, open-ended questions, not yes or no questions. You want them to be talking. And so open-ended questions start with, tell me a little bit about, and then you fill in the, tell me a little bit about your summer internship. Tell me a little bit about how you kept busy in high school. Tell me a little bit about how you liked the University of Akron. So open-ended questions, I think, are just a kind of a great segue, whether you're an introvert, Joe, or whoever, whatever walk of life. Tell me a little bit about, or explain to me, or what is, open-ended questions usually are the best kind of conversation starters. In reverse, Jake, you should be prepared to answer open-ended questions that are not yes or no, and to be able to articulate your story, if you will. Just like you articulate the value of Phi Gamma Delta, articulate the value of Jake. And again, I'm assuming this is your interview, and let's just say you're in business. Talk a little bit about your experience of Phi Gamma Delta and how that relates to the current position that we have right now. And hopefully you've thought about that and you translate that in. So number one, if you're the recruiter, open-ended questions in terms of experience, know-how, approach, strategy, and then preparation as a recruitee to be able to answer open-ended questions in a concise, value-added manner that relates to your skills and the organization by which you're talking about. If that's a job, what you've done before, and how you can add value to that job. With Phi Gamma Delta, I'm really good at academics. I'm into community service, and I'm pretty good on the football field. Those are all kind of things, aspects that lay pretty well there. So preparedness to be both the recruitee and the recruiter in an open-ended question environment are the types of things. I would always kind of bring back your experience related to the job too. I think sometimes people like to go on a tangent a little bit more philosophically versus you're there for an interview to be able to, try to always hone it back to why that's important to the job. Whether it be your experience or your accomplishment and how that relates to the task at hand in an interview. So I think that's always important. We call that connecting the dots, if you will, versus just answering the question. The question's coming from an essence of, is Jake going to be a good employee of us? That's why I'm asking the question. That's why you're sitting in front of me. So keep that in mind as you're answering the question. I would also have an idea before you go in there of what you think you're going to be asked. It's okay. We talked about LinkedIn earlier. Let's say I have an interview at JP Morgan Chase. I look at my LinkedIn profile. I see, Jake, you say, I actually have 2 fraternity brothers that work there already. You may not even know them. Ask them in advance. I'd like to spend just a couple minutes. I have actually an interview with your company. Find out what you're going to be asked. A little preparedness in terms of not just, well, here are the standard interview questions, but usually there's interview questions related to culture and company that they like to ask and that are important to them. So through your network, be prepared to find out a little bit. There's somebody you could talk to that has worked for that company, interviewed with that company, that you can get a little bit more information. If for some reason you have no information in front of you, check out their website. You'll find out what's the value and what they're about. And I like to think their questions are going to be geared towards that.
So
Thanks,
Dave, we've got a couple more questions on the Q&A. Anthony was first, but Doyle has a follow-up to the one that you just answered. So I'll have you answer Doyle's first, then we'll get to Anthony's next, and that might end up with time for us. But Doyle asks, for these open-ended questions, how long of an answer should I give? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? How long should the response be?
Typically, I like to start off an interview in more of an informal setting. I don't know if you could tell by my approach, kind of an informal approach, but a very formal process in my mind. Tell me a little bit about yourself, which could be a tricky question. Well, I was born, and next thing you know, you're 15, 20 minutes into it. I would kind of get a feel for it. If you know you're going to be there for a half hour and you're going to cover a lot of ground, you might want to move pretty quickly. If you're going to be there for a half-day interview and you know you're going to be the half-day interview, that first open-end question that may go 5 or 10 minutes. So get a lay of the land related to the holistic view of how long the interview is. If they schedule a half hour, you better not have a long answer with anything. You better get to it. If you're going to be there hours, and again, half day, full day, and you get the vibe that it's a little bit more laid back, feel free to elaborate a little more. However, if you're not quite sure, err on the side of being concise, because you can always then say, does that answer your question, or is there more information you'd like to hear? And usually there is. Tell me a little bit more about your first job. So err on the side of a well-oiled, concise answer versus a long-winded answer.
Awesome. Thank you. So then Anthony asks about retention. So with retention being a big part of recruitment, how do you think chapters, or maybe in this case, Robert Half, can be dynamic in their efforts to maintain that interest?
I think you learn from the past. We do that a lot with our employees. We do a lot of, and you're not, maybe you're not going to do this in terms of attorney. We do a lot of surveys, a lot of checkpoints. We're meeting with our people once a week. How is it going? I think that can relate to the fraternity in terms of how it's going, especially early on. The turnover, the earlier in the game, the more that there's turnover. And so the longer that they're there in the organization, the less turnover. That may seem basic, but let's work with that. So early on in the first 30 days, there probably should be a lot of checkpoints and some of the struggles that you'll find, whether it be Robert Half or in a fraternity, are pretty basic that you can kind of overcome with a little communication and a little bit of guidance. But if there's not that opportunity or not that effort, you got higher turnover. So time and attention means a lot, I guess what I'm saying, Joe. So I would say key to retention is obviously making sure that you're hiring or recruiting and bringing in good people. I mean, that's check one. but really be on top of that as far as how things are going in that first 30 to 45 days. Although they may not leave in that first 35 days, they've made the decision that this probably is not right for me. They may go a little longer, so don't be fooled when the actual, hey, this is not right for me, I'm dropping out. Don't be fooled by that time. It's like when somebody puts their notice in with us, that happened 45 days ago. That didn't happen that day. So that first 30 to 45 days, I think, is critical with touch points and making sure. That could be through various programs, Big Brother programs, mentor programs, checkpoints, and making sure that they feel important, that their voice matters. If they're not comfortable with something or want to see more of something or struggling with something in terms of keeping up with their schoolwork, then we make adjustments. And we got to be willing to do that too. Not every employee is the same. Not every member is the same. We got to make some adjustments to be flexible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. And I think,
go ahead, Jake.
I think Doyle had another kind of follow-up question to something that you said. He asks, when it comes to discussion of previous employment, is relevant more important than recent?
That's a really good question. Depends on the form of job, and depends on what I'm interviewing for. All things remaining the same, I would say relevant is the most important versus recent, if I'm hearing the question correctly. Relevant is more important than recent. Skills is more important than timing. Unless it's technology, and most recent and relevant are the same thing. So bear with me on that one. But I think relevancy in terms of what you'll actually be doing and interviewing for is the most important. The exception being when you start to get times of the relevancy was 10 years ago, well, then that's not so relevant now. Even though you may feel it's relevant, it's not so relevant now. So there is, the more time that goes between that relevancy and the interview or the point in time by which we're talking about matters too. So I'm assuming we're talking about a couple months to a year and a half on the timing, but relevancy is more important than timing. And hopefully I answered that question correctly.
Yeah. We've got one more from Ryan. He asks, what are some other skills you've acquired during undergrad or during your time at headquarters that have helped set you apart as a professional? So how has that fraternity experience separated you from a comparable candidate?
Public speaking. Joe, you mentioned, being an introvert, but you're here on a Zoom call. No one could tell that you're an introvert until you would openly admit it. And my guess is that skills picked up from Phi Gamma Delta, being a field secretary, being on staff. Public speaking is a tough one. And public speaking isn't speaking in front of 500 people. It could be. It could be standing in front of a group of 10, 15. I got to tell you, the most important meetings I've spoken in front of aren't 500. I've spoken in front of 1,000 people before. But the most important are a group of 10 or 12, usually our C-suite, our CFO or CEO. There's not that many in the room, but their opinion matters, let me tell you. So speaking in front of that group and speaking with confidence and speaking with relevancy, speaking with engagement, and trying to include other people in terms of all those like nuances of public speaking. To me, I've learned combination of the fraternity and on staff because you're forced to, and it's the greatest job you can have. And I say the field secretary in particular, because you're constantly forced to do that. Force is not the right word. It's the job. You're encouraged to do that, and that's what it is. And that means a ton. So, and then usually they're strangers, although they're brothers. Every 3 days, you're in front of a new group of brothers, let's put it that way, of which you know very few. And you're relaying important messages and points of being that are key. And you got to get buy-in, you got to get engagement, you got to have them somewhat listening. And that's a skill in itself, along with the public speaking.
Absolutely. I can definitely attest to that last piece over the last year. So, all right. Well, we're about at 7 o'clock, so I don't want to keep us too much longer. But Jake, did you have anything else to wrap us up?
Yeah, I do just have one more fun question, Dave. Just as a final one, and then we'll let you all get about the rest of your night and into your weekend. But Dave, if there's one thing you could have told yourself back when you graduated college, whether it was your master's or when you were at headquarters, if there was one thing you would tell yourself, you could travel back in time, what would you tell yourself?
The word phrase that I have in my mind is that it all matters. You can say enjoy life. You can say take it serious. There's a lot of things, but I would say it all matters early on. I think the things that you pull from later in life, professionally and personally, are learned in those ages of 16 and maybe earlier, but 16 to 25. And those lessons, those skills are just kind of repeated over and over. That's not to say I haven't learned things in the last 10 and 15 years. Please don't get me wrong. But if I have to pick up the bulk of things that I've learned or had been taught or that I saw, not even that, not even skills, just things that I see that I remember from trips and people that I engage with, it all matters in that time frame, whether it's the 4 years of college or right out of college. Those are really important years in your professional and personal development. You could probably take of most of which the foundation that I have today kind of was built right then. And so, that's about a 10-year span. And you think about a 80-year life, to put it all in that 10-year span related to the things that we're talking about, and maybe even a little tighter than 10 years, it all matters. It all matters what you're learning. It all matters who you're talking to. It all matters what's important to you. It all matters what character you come up with. It all matters what your values are, what your position are, and what your opinions are in life. And those are honed in at that. So it all matters.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dave, and brothers. Thank you all for being here tonight. If you do have any other questions for either Joe, Dave, or I, we'd love to answer them. You can email myself or Joe. I'll drop my email in the. I think a lot of you probably have it, but here's my email address. What we do is we encourage you all in 2 weeks. We'll be having another small group session. We'd love to see you all there in either a part of the recruitment session or the new member education session. Once again, for those of you who don't have either of those roles, for those of you who are presidents or even on IFC, we'd love to still see you at those and just pick one. There's some great, we do some great conversations. It's been really fun getting to know a lot of you all, and we hope we can just keep helping, answering questions along the way. Once again, thank you all for coming. I just want to reiterate again I'm trying to think of the certificates, I guess, that we will be giving out to you all for being here. For going through the whole process, a certificate of completion, as well as some recruitment scholarships that we will be more or less raffling off, but giving away towards the end of this whole summit series at the end of August. So once again, we thank you all so much for being here. This was so exciting, Dave. We can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom with us. And brothers, once again, if you have any questions, you can email Joe or I, and we'd love to see you here in 2 weeks. And enjoy the rest of your night. Enjoy your weekend. Be safe. Be healthy. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you, brothers.
Thanks, everyone.